"I'd trade you for that tall guy at the pool in a heartbeat." Those were the venomous words Melissa Walker spat at her crippled husband, her smile sharp enough to cut glass as strangers froze in shock. She thought she was mocking a broken man in a wheelchair. What she didn't know was that Henry had already orchestrated the most devastating response of his life. The move he made after that poolside humiliation didn't just shatter her pride, it shocked everyone who thought they knew what loyalty, betrayal, and strength really looked like. Dear viewers, how would you react if the person you trusted most treated you like you were disposable? What would you do if your spouse mocked you in front of strangers? Would you stay quiet, or strike back later? Share your answer below in the comments. Henry Walker sat by the shimmering pool, sunlight catching the metal frame of his wheelchair, when his wife leaned close with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her voice carried just loud enough for strangers to hear. "I'd trade you for that tall guy at the pool in a heartbeat." The laughter around them faltered, eyes turned, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Henry didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted his sunglasses and let the faintest smile curl across his lips, because what he would do next wasn't just a reply. It was a move that would shock not only his wife, but everyone who thought a crippled man couldn't rise higher than them all. The late afternoon sun shimmered across the turquoise water of the country club pool, the air filled with the sound of splashes, cocktails being stirred, and muted laughter from wealthy couples stretched out on lounge chairs. But amid the noise, Henry Walker sat quietly in his wheelchair, his back straight, sunglasses shielding his eyes, his presence commanding in a way that didn't need words. Henry had once been a Marine officer, the kind of man who walked into a room and silenced it. But 2 years earlier, an accident had taken his ability to walk, and though his body bore scars, his mind remained sharp, disciplined, calculating. He was the kind of man who could turn silence into strength. Beside him, Melissa adjusted her designer sun hat, sipping her martini as her eyes wandered across the pool deck. She hadn't touched Henry's hand in weeks. She hadn't asked about his work in months. She was too busy scanning for attention, desperate to remind herself that she still had the power to turn heads. Her gaze landed on a tall, broad-shouldered man cutting through the water. He rose from the pool, droplets sliding down his chest, and Melissa's lips curled into a smile that Henry noticed even behind his dark glasses. Leaning in, Melissa placed her hand on Henry's arm as if whispering something sweet. But instead, she let her words drip like acid, loud enough for those closest to hear. "If I could trade you for that tall guy over there, I would in a heartbeat." The sound seemed to echo, bouncing off the concrete and striking Henry harder than any bullet ever had. Conversations froze. The couple at the next chair shifted uncomfortably. The tall guy smirked, flexing slightly, basking in the attention. Melissa leaned back, satisfied, sipping her drink as though she had scored a victory. Henry didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or let his jaw tighten. Instead, he allowed the faintest smile to curve at the corner of his mouth. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed a short text. He slid the phone back as smoothly as if nothing had happened. To the onlookers, it seemed like indifference. To Melissa, it was just Henry being his usual boring self, calm, predictable, silent. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about getting more ice, and sauntered off toward the bar. But inside Henry's silence, something far more dangerous had been set in motion. Because this wasn't the first insult. This wasn't the first time Melissa had chipped away at him in public, mocking his chair, questioning his worth, acting as if his accident had made him half a man. For months, he had endured, saying nothing, letting her believe she still controlled the game. But today, in front of strangers, in front of laughter, she had crossed a line she didn't know existed. Henry adjusted his sunglasses, the faint reflection of the pool shimmering on the lenses, and let his mind drift. He remembered his days in the Marines, when silence before a mission was the most dangerous part, the quiet planning, the steady breath, the moment before striking. Melissa had just declared war without realizing it. At that pool, surrounded by laughter and shallow whispers, Henry decided her world was about to collapse. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with the kind of precision only a disciplined man could orchestrate. The tall guy. He was nothing. A momentary distraction. But Henry? Henry was the storm she never saw coming. Melissa returned from the pool that evening, buzzing with the false thrill of attention. She strutted through the grand hallway of their mansion, heels clicking like victory drums, unaware that her own footsteps echoed the beginning of her downfall. Henry followed minutes later, wheeling himself calmly inside, saying nothing. She tossed her hat on the marble counter and poured another drink. "You know, Henry," she said without looking at him, "if you tried harder, maybe people wouldn't feel sorry for me. I could still be the wife of someone admired instead of pitied." Henry didn't respond. He had trained himself long ago that silence unsettled people more than anger. Melissa hated silence. She wanted him to fight, to argue, to lose control. He gave her none of it. Instead, he turned his chair toward the double oak doors at the far end of the hall, his study. Melissa never went inside. She once said, "It smells like work in there," and avoided it ever since. She had no idea that behind those doors lay the truth of who Henry really was. The study smelled of leather and ink, softly lit by a lamp that highlighted rows of binders and framed certificates. On the wall hung a faded photograph of Henry in uniform, younger, upright, decorated for valor. But the desk was where the real story lived. 3 computer monitors glowed with charts, property blueprints, and stock tickers. Thick files labeled with real estate company names sat stacked neatly. Contracts with government housing boards and private developers filled the drawers. Melissa thought Henry's little consultancy was a pity project that kept him busy. In reality, it was an empire, one he had built brick by brick during sleepless nights after the accident, determined to prove to himself he wasn't finished. On the bottom shelf sat a black leather folder. Inside, the prenuptial agreement. He remembered the day, years ago, when his lawyer had warned him. "Henry, you're a good man, but protect yourself. Wealth has a way of changing people. If loyalty ever breaks, this will be your shield." Melissa had signed it without blinking, too in love with his charm, too eager to enjoy the benefits of a soldier with steady pay and a promising future. Now, years later, she had no memory of it. Henry leaned back in his chair, looking at the folder. He thought of the accident, the explosion on a dusty road overseas, the nights in the hospital when he believed his life was over. He had looked at Melissa then as his anchor. But slowly, painfully, he realized she wasn't built to weather storms. She wanted sunshine only. And when the clouds came, she resented him for it. That realization didn't make him bitter. It made him patient. He decided long ago that he would never argue with her insults, never fight her vanity. He would let her play her shallow games, because he knew one day, she would overstep. And when that day came, his patience would turn into precision. Today had been that day. He scrolled through his phone, reviewing the text he had sent at the pool. Within an hour, his lawyer would freeze the accounts Melissa casually used, accounts she believed were hers but were legally his. The mansion, the cars, even the boutique Melissa bragged about owning, every thread of it tied back to him. Melissa, meanwhile, called out from the kitchen. "Are we doing dinner, or should I go out with friends?" "Go with friends," Henry answered calmly. She laughed. "Thought so. Try not to get lonely in that cave of yours." Henry looked at the photo of his old unit, his brothers in arms, some alive, some gone. He whispered softly, "Lonely is the man who has no purpose." Melissa had no idea those words weren't about him, they were about her. Because for the first time, Henry wasn't just preparing to endure her cruelty. He was preparing to end her reign in his life. And he would do it not with rage, but with the cold discipline of a man who had spent his life in service, strategy, and survival. The phone buzzed again. A message from his lawyer, "It's done." Henry allowed himself the faintest smile. The study, once a silent sanctuary, had just become the war room for her undoing. Melissa pulled into the driveway later that night, tipsy from cocktails and laughter with her friends. She hummed as she walked up the marble steps of the mansion, her heels clacking against the stone. She dug through her purse for her keys, only to frown. The lock didn't click. She tried again, harder. Nothing. "Henry," she called, knocking on the door. "The lock is jammed." A few seconds later, the door opened. Henry sat there in his wheelchair, perfectly calm, a folder resting on his lap. His expression wasn't angry, it was controlled, unsettlingly serene. "Melissa," he said softly. "Welcome home." "What's wrong with the locks?" she demanded. "They're new," he replied. "Only I have the keys now." She blinked, half laughing. "What? That's ridiculous. Hand me mine." Henry didn't move. Instead, he wheeled back, gesturing toward the dining table where a neat stack of documents sat. Melissa followed him in, confused and irritated. "What is this?" she asked. "Reality," Henry answered. "Sit down." Melissa rolled her eyes but sat, thinking this was one of his lectures. She glanced at her phone, planning to scroll while he spoke. But as she unlocked it, she froze. A notification banner flashed, card declined. "What the?" She tried another app, her shopping wallet. Same message. Another attempt, her boutique's account. Frozen. "What's going on, Henry?" she snapped. Henry folded his hands on the folder. "Melissa, do you know what today was?" She scoffed. "A hot day at the pool. It was the day you finally crossed the line." His voice was calm, measured, each word deliberate. "I've tolerated your whispers, your comparisons, your disdain. But today, you humiliated me in public. And that, Melissa, was the last mistake you'll make under my roof." Melissa's face flushed. "Oh, come on, Henry. Don't be dramatic. It was a joke." "Jokes don't freeze bank accounts," he interrupted. Her eyes widened. You did this?" "Yes. And you'll find the boutique is no longer under your name. The cars, registered to my company. The staff. They answer to me. Everything you thought was yours was always mine." He slid the folder across the table. "You signed this years ago. Do you remember?" Melissa picked it up with shaking hands. "The prenup." She had signed it quickly, excited about the marriage, never bothering to read the fine print. Now the words burned on the page: "In the event of infidelity, disloyalty, or abandonment, all shared assets revert to Henry's ownership." Her mouth went dry. This isn't fair." Henry tilted his head. "Fair? Fair was me giving you comfort after my accident, giving you patience while you sneered at me, giving you a life most women would kill for. And what did you give me, Melissa? A wish at a pool that I were someone else." Her voice cracked. "Henry, I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did," he said quietly. "And now, you live with the meaning." Melissa's phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her best friend Clara texting. "Is it true Henry pulled his funding from your dad's company? People are talking." Her chest tightened. "You wouldn't." "I already did," Henry said. "Your father's contracts. Cancelled. The funds I provided. Withdrawn. Melissa, you and your family have been living under the umbrella of my goodwill for years. Today, I closed the umbrella." Melissa stood, her voice trembling. "You can't just erase me." Henry's gaze was steady, piercing. "I don't have to erase you. You erased yourself when you chose to mock me. Tonight, I only signed the paperwork to match the choice you already made." For the first time in years, Melissa felt small in that mansion. She looked around at the chandeliers, the art, the marble floors, all the things she bragged about on social media, and realized none of it was truly hers. Her chest heaved as she pointed a finger at him. "You'll regret this, Henry." But even as she said it, her voice cracked, betraying the fear growing in her gut. Henry wheeled closer, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharp as steel. "No, Melissa. You will." Melissa stormed out of the mansion that night, rage and fear battling in her chest. She was used to threatening tantrums ending with Henry apologizing or quietly enduring her cruelty. But this time, his calm words followed her like chains. "Tonight, I only signed the paperwork to match the choice you already made." She refused to believe it. It had to be a bluff. The next morning, she met her friend Clara at a cafe. Clara was scrolling through her phone when Melissa dropped into the seat opposite her, sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. "Clara, you won't believe what Henry's pulled. He froze my accounts. He thinks he can lock me out of my own life." Clara looked up slowly, her lips pressed tight. "Mel, everyone's talking. Your dad's company, the contracts vanished overnight. Word is Henry was the investor behind the scenes. Without him, it's done." Melissa's stomach dropped. "No. That can't be true." Clara shrugged, cold. "You paraded that tall guy at the pool insult all over town. People saw. They're not sympathizing with you, they're admiring Henry." Melissa's throat went dry. She had expected pity, allies, reassurance. Instead, she found whispers and judgment. Even her closest friend looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. Later that day, desperate, Melissa called the tall man from the pool, Derek. She put on her sultriest voice, laughing as if nothing had happened. "Hey, remember me? Thought we could." He cut her off with a low chuckle. "Yeah, I remember. The woman who humiliated her husband in front of everyone just to look at me. Not my type. Don't call again." Click. Melissa sat frozen, phone pressed to her ear. The humiliation stung worse than Henry's coldness. She had gambled her marriage on the illusion of options, and the man she would have traded for, tossed her aside like she was nothing. That evening, she drove to her parents' home, clutching onto the hope that at least they would defend her. But her father, Robert, met her at the door, his face ashen. "Melissa," he said gravely, "is it true you mocked Henry at the club?" Her voice wavered. "Dad, I was joking. Why does everyone keep? Do you realize what you've done?" he snapped, slamming his fist against the doorframe. "That man has been propping up our company for years. Every contract, every lifeline, Henry signed them. Without him, we're finished." Her mother's voice carried from the living room, tight with shame. "We raised you better than this, Melissa. He gave you everything, and you repaid him with cruelty." Tears stung her eyes. "You're blaming me? He's the one who—" "No," Robert cut her off, his voice shaking with fury. "You destroyed your marriage. And in doing so, you dragged us down with you." Melissa staggered back. For the first time, her parents didn't offer comfort. They offered blame. The door shut in her face, leaving her alone on the porch with the sound of her father's anger echoing behind it. By nightfall, Melissa found herself driving aimlessly through the city streets, mascara streaking her cheeks. Her credit cards were dead, her boutique unreachable, her friends distant, her family furious. She was suddenly, no one. She pulled over outside the mansion gates, staring at the home that once made her feel untouchable. The iron bars looked colder than ever. Inside, lights glowed warmly. Henry was there, calm, steady, untouchable. Melissa gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. For the first time, fear fully settled in. Not fear of Henry's anger, but fear of irrelevance. The world she built on his shoulders had collapsed in less than 24 hours. And as she sat outside, trembling, she realized Henry hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't argued, begged, or threatened. He had simply acted. And that made him terrifying. By the third day, Melissa's pride had been stripped away like old paint. The boutique she bragged about? Empty. Suppliers cut ties overnight once Henry's money disappeared. Her friends stopped answering calls. Her family was drowning in bankruptcy. Her last shred of hope was Henry. At dusk, she drove back to the mansion. The iron gates loomed high, the estate glowing with warm lights inside. It had always been her stage for showing off. Now it felt like a fortress keeping her out. She stepped out of the car, heels sinking into the gravel, and walked up to the gate. She pressed the buzzer, her voice trembling. "Henry, please. It's me." No answer. "Henry, open the gate. We need to talk." Silence. Her voice cracked, desperation leaking through. I'm sorry, okay? I said something stupid. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't." The intercom clicked. Henry's voice, calm as steel, filled the air. "Melissa." Relief washed over her. "Yes. It's me. Please, can we just—" "You traded me," Henry said, his tone steady, unshaken. "At that pool, in front of strangers, you made your choice. You wanted the tall guy. You wanted attention. You wanted anything but me. And now, you live with that trade." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She clutched the bars like a prisoner. "Henry, don't do this. We've been married for years. We can fix it." Henry's wheelchair whirred faintly as he approached the window near the gate. He looked out, his silhouette framed by the glow behind him. Calm. Unmoved. "Melissa, you don't fix cruelty," he said quietly. "You exposed who you are. And I've decided I won't carry you anymore." Her knees buckled. She dropped to the gravel, sobbing, mascara streaking down her face. For the first time in her life, she was begging, and no one came to lift her up. "Henry, I'll change. Please. Don't leave me out here like this." Henry's eyes narrowed, not with hate, but with finality. "Melissa, you thought my chair made me weak. But it made me stronger than you could ever understand. You'll realize too late, the man you mocked was the man holding your entire world together." She sobbed harder, reaching through the bars as if she could touch him. But Henry simply turned, wheeled away, and closed the curtains. The gate stayed locked. The night swallowed Melissa's cries, leaving her collapsed on the gravel, a woman who once had everything, reduced to nothing but regret. The next morning, newspapers and online feeds across the city lit up with a headline Melissa never imagined she would see. "Paralyzed veteran builds hidden empire, donates millions to rehabilitate wounded soldiers." Melissa sat in the lobby of a budget motel, her hair unkempt, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, staring at the screen in disbelief. The man she had mocked at the pool, her husband, the man she told the world she'd trade for a stranger, was being hailed as a hero. Flashbulbs snapped as Henry appeared at a press conference in front of City Hall. Dressed in a crisp tailored suit, seated in his wheelchair with military posture, he was flanked by veterans in uniform. His calm, commanding presence silenced the crowd. 2 years ago, Henry began, his voice steady, "I thought my life was over. My body was broken, my pride shattered. But I learned something. Strength isn't measured by how far you walk, it's measured by how far you rise after you've fallen." The audience leaned in. Melissa's chest tightened as she watched on live TV. "That's why today," Henry continued, "I'm dedicating $20 million to build the Walker Rehabilitation Center for Veterans, an institution that will give men and women who served our country the chance to rebuild their lives with dignity." The crowd erupted into applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Henry raised a hand gently, waiting for silence. "I was lucky to find purpose again through business. But too many of my brothers and sisters in uniform aren't given that chance. This center will change that. And this is just the beginning. The cameras cut to the crowd, mothers of wounded soldiers crying, young veterans clapping with tears in their eyes, city officials shaking Henry's hand. Melissa's phone buzzed. A message from Clara. You really didn't know, did you? He was a multimillionaire this whole time. Everyone's saying you threw away a king for a poolside joke. Melissa's hands shook as she dropped the phone. She thought back to the study, the files, the screens she had dismissed as boring. She thought about the late nights Henry stayed awake, the silence she mocked as loneliness. She had been blind. That evening, Henry wheeled through the construction site where the new rehabilitation center would stand. City officials, architects, and investors crowded around him, listening to his every word. For the first time since his accident, he wasn't just surviving, he was leading again. He stopped, staring at the foundation being dug. Here, he said, pointing. This is where hope begins. The men around him nodded, scribbling notes. But what truly mattered was the crowd of veterans standing nearby, eyes shining with gratitude. One man stepped forward, his prosthetic leg glinting under the lights. He saluted Henry. Sir, thank you for giving us a second chance. Henry saluted back, his voice breaking for the first time in years. We all deserve one. Melissa watched from the shadows of her motel room, the applause echoing from the TV. Her heart pounded as realization struck. The crippled man she ridiculed was not only stronger than her, but greater than she had ever understood. He had turned humiliation into legacy. And now the world adored him. While she was left forgotten. 2 weeks later, the Walker Rehabilitation Center broke ground with television crews and city officials in attendance. Henry rolled onto the stage as the guest of honor, his name now synonymous with resilience and leadership. Melissa sat miles away in a rundown motel, the curtains drawn to block out the daylight, watching him on the flickering TV screen. The contrast was cruel. Once, she had been the wife standing beside him at such events, basking in borrowed light. Now, she watched from the shadows, stripped of name, wealth, and dignity. The news segment showed Henry cutting the ceremonial ribbon, surrounded by veterans in wheelchairs, mothers with folded flags in their laps, and children wearing shirts that read, "Heroes live here." His speech was brief, but every word carried weight. Some think strength is about muscles or medals. But real strength, Henry paused, scanning the crowd, is about choosing integrity when betrayal would be easier, about standing tall even if you cannot walk. The audience erupted in cheers. The mayor clasped his hand, veterans saluted, and cameras flashed like fireworks. Melissa felt bile rise in her throat. Every cheer was a nail in the coffin of her former life. Every headline that called Henry a modern hero reminded her of the day at the pool when she had mocked him for being less than. She had thought she was clever, witty, untouchable. Instead, she had exposed herself as shallow and cruel, while Henry rose higher than ever. Back at the mansion, Henry's phone buzzed endlessly with messages from investors, journalists, and old military friends. Women, many of them the same socialites who once envied Melissa, sent letters of admiration. But Henry wasn't interested. To him, this wasn't about revenge or attention. It was about reclaiming his honor and proving that his accident hadn't ended his story. Still, when he passed the tall mirror in the hallway that night, he caught his reflection, broad shoulders, calm eyes, the faint scars peeking from his collar, and whispered to himself. You are not broken. You were never broken. Meanwhile, Melissa's fall from grace spread like wildfire. At the club, whispers followed her name. That's the one who mocked her crippled husband, people said, shaking their heads. Former friends stopped inviting her. The tall man at the pool avoided eye contact when she appeared. Even her parents refused her calls, buried under the wreckage of their own financial ruin. The woman who once flaunted diamonds now pawned them for rent. The woman who mocked Henry's silence now sat in silence herself, forgotten. One evening, she stood outside the gates of the mansion again, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. She pressed the buzzer, her voice trembling. "Henry, please. Just 5 minutes." The intercom crackled, then Henry's voice came through, calm and final. "Melissa, you once said you'd trade me for another man. The truth is, you already did. And that trade cost you everything." She sobbed into the speaker. "I was wrong. Please, just let me back." Henry's voice didn't waver. "Melissa, the world saw what you chose. And so did I. There's no return." The line went dead. The gate stayed shut. Melissa slid down the bars, weeping into the gravel. For the first time, she understood the truth: she hadn't just lost her husband. She had lost the only man who ever truly carried her. The news of Henry's center spread nationally. Newspapers ran his story with headlines like, "From wheelchair to warrior, veteran turns pain into purpose." Young men quoted his words on social media. His face became a symbol of dignity. Melissa's name, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. Not of wealth or fame, but of betrayal. People whispered it like a warning: "Don't be a Melissa." And so, the crippled husband she mocked rose to greatness, while the wife who once looked down on him was left staring up, forgotten, her own laughter haunting her like a curse. The trade she joked about at the pool had become reality. She traded a king for a mirage. And what Henry did next, not revenge, but legacy, shocked not only her but the world.